Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 78.
Congratulations, you showed up. Give yourself a high five in celebration of your success. Welcome to the Cashflow Diary, where new and experienced investors come to take confident action towards their goals. Your host is a family man, a real estate entrepreneur, investor, coach, and instructor. As a master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow 101 game, he's inspired many to begin their journey into creating cash flow for themselves and their family. And now, here he is to offer you the tools required to earn the income desired. Your cash flow coach, Jay Massey.
All right, and welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I am your host, Jay Massey, and I'm so glad that you made it. I think you're going to be glad too, because you've probably heard me say more than once that wealth is a team sport. And you're like, where did that come from? Promise you it wasn't an original idea, but I did get it from today's guest. I'm looking forward for you to meet this person as well. Now, if this is the first time you and I have met, feel free to go over to learninvestingnow.com, learninvestingnow.com. What we are doing is we've got a free course sitting there just for you so that you can get your process started on learning how to invest. Period. Now, some of you have said, you know what, I've learned enough and I'm ready to take action. Great. So you're going to go over to begininvestingnow.com. We've got a number of cash flowing assets sitting there waiting for you to pick up and just run with the ball and have tons of fun building your cash flow with Cashflow Diary. Now, today's guest is, in my opinion, a very, very energetic, fun-loving guy because he does things in the form of games, and we all love games. At least I do. You know, maybe you don't, but I love games. It's always more fun to play at a high level. And when you're playing at a high level with the right individuals, you never know what you might be able to accomplish. Just to give you some idea of what I mean, could you just imagine being a part of a company that was able to generate $30 million of revenues in 10 months? Just think about that. So that process in and of itself means today's guest has a lot to share with you and I. So what I want you to do is that I want you to take copious notes today. I want you to understand not just, how to create cash flow, but understand something very important that we're going to talk about today, something called the 4 levels of wealth. And I'm excited to learn. Hopefully you are too. So let's pay attention and hear what Mr. Jim Bunch has to share with us today. Jim, you there?
Thanks, Jay. It's great to reconnect with you.
Yeah, I know, right? It's been a long time. It's like, for some reason, the what is it? I think we're like, 20 miles apart, but yet it feels like it's further.
That's typically the way that it works. I see my best friends like every couple of years, unless we're in another country on a beach somewhere. So that seems to be the way it works out.
Yeah, that's right. You got to go to another country to meet your neighbor.
Exactly.
It makes no sense whatsoever. Now, for the few people who may not know, one of the things that I like to say is I envision that today's entrepreneurs are like yesterday's superheroes. We've got Superman and Spider-Man and Wonder Woman and all these great things. So, but each one of those superheroes has what they call an origin story. Peter Parker got bit by a spider and then boom, he became Spider-Man. What I always like to find out from our guests is, what's your origin story? Before Jim Bunch was Jim Bunch, before you had, companies doing millions of dollars of revenue, who were you? How did you decide to get started? And what are some of the most important lessons you think you've learned along the way?
Well, it's an interesting frame. I actually love that. And I guess the origin for me was I started my first business in college selling nutritional supplements, which were supposed to help people, heal their health. And then what I figured out, being the entrepreneur at heart and didn't even realize it, is it's great for curing all these other things and yada, yada, yada. But what it was really good for was curing hangovers. And so having gone to the University of Florida, that was in way more demand than trying to help these kids with health, which they were already healthy. So that kind of got me along there. And after that, I met Tony Robbins, which I know you're familiar with. And that took me down a different path because I had never been exposed to personal development or any kind of growth or any of that kind of stuff. I grew up in a one stoplight town with 13 bars. So it wasn't exactly a success mecca. And I got out of Dodge as soon as I can, but that put me into a direction. It put me into orbit around some really high level entrepreneurs. It started showing me that if I change my mindset and my skill sets and my environments, then I can change my reality. And then after being in that for a couple of years and meeting Bob Proctor and John Assaraf and some of the other guys and building companies with them, I got involved in technology because I grew one of my businesses very quickly, and the technology to operationalize and scale that business didn't exist. So it was more out of desperation than real inspiration that I created this first what we call WYSIWYG website system, where we still own the company today, but it's a $35 a month website company that small business owners have everything in one place. And that's not novel today, but 15, 16 years ago, you had to hire a designer, you had to hire somebody to put your shopping cart together, and somebody to put an autoresponder together and all that. And so we were one of the first to do that. And then, so that was my first tech play. And then, as you mentioned already, John Assaraf and myself and a handful of our other friends grew a company from 6 employees to 1,500 employees in a year and 30 million in revenue. And that was the virtual tour industry that we brought to light and public in the late 90s. So combining these two pathways of personal development and technology has really been where I've carved my 10,000 hours of expertise, if you will.
Yeah, 10,000 hours. It sounds like a little bit more than that. But now, there was something that you said in there that I think was very, very pertinent to bring out. You mentioned mindsets. You've also mentioned skill sets, but you also said environments. Talk to us a little bit more about what you meant by environments, because we hear people talk about you got to have the right mindset and skill set all the time. But that was a uniqueness I remember picking up from you. One of the first times I met is this. You talk about environments.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, they go to the books, tapes, and seminars, and that's fantastic. So imagine that you go to a seminar for 3 days. And, we used to put 2,500 people into these events every weekend. They get excited, pumped up, motivated. They'd set goals, and then they'd go out to conquer the world. But what I started noticing, and this is one of those origin points, is having done that for a couple of years and being on the road where I saw thousands of people every weekend leave the events, what I unfortunately saw was only 4% of the population was actually applying what they were learning. And I'm guessing you see that with people who are investing also, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So I really didn't have the answer for it until I met another one of my mentors, a guy by the name of Thomas Leonard, who's no longer alive. But Thomas, I asked him the question. I said, why are people spending so much money on this? They have the best intentions. They're cashing out 401ks and leveraging their real estate, and they're doing all this stuff to get ahead. And yet 4% are succeeding, which is a 96% failure rate in the personal growth or success industry. And he said it real matter of fact, and I'll always remember this. He said, most people are trying to use willpower to change their behavior. If they understood how to delegate their success to the environments, they would win. And at the time when he was alive, he taught me something called the 7 environments of you. We now teach it as part of his legacy I wanted to pass on to the world because it meant so much to me, is called the 9 environments of you. And the concept is really simple. If I were to take you, Jay, and plop you, let's say that from birth, I raised you in a very hard, harsh, troublesome environment, and I kept you in that environment your whole life, you most likely would perform at the level of the environment. If, however, at some point you were introduced to a concept, an idea, or other environments that cause you to leave some of those environments and form new environments where there was more prosperity, where there was more health, where there were happier people, you would then begin to mold into those new environments. A great example is the show The Biggest Loser. Do you ever watch that TV show?
Of those that are those reality TV shows, it's one of the few that I will ever, actually stop to watch because it's like positive in some way.
It is. So there's a case study. If you watch one of those shows, what do? They pull people who their health has gone to heck in a handbasket. They pull them out of their homes and out of their workplace, and they put them on a fat farm for 90 days or 6 weeks or whatever the program runs. And while they're there, they add coaches, they add nutritionists, they add doctors, they add other people who are headed in the same direction. And you get to, as the watcher, you get to see them playing games and exercises and all this. And every point in the show, two things happen. Number one, you see the mental and emotional barrier or blocks that's been holding this person back their whole life. That's what the trainers do, is basically, yell at them or hug them or whatever they have to do to get them to have that breakdown so that they can break through. The second thing that you see is at some point in the show, when they've lost a bunch of weight, they go back home. And when they go back home, if you watch how the camera pans around, 99% of the time, the people, in other words, their family and friends and coworkers, are also overweight. Now, if you look at this, these environments are dictating their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors. So I can take any human and redesign the environments around them for wealth, health, and happiness. And over time, those environments, which are quote unquote on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, are going to mold the behaviors of that client. It's both internal and external. So we like to work on doing life by design instead of life by default, which means we design environments around people so that their success becomes easier and more consistent than the people who are going into a seminar for 2 days or 3 days, and then they've got 363 days back to their old environment.
Yeah, those 363 days seem to be way more powerful. I have always said that environment trumps will, and you've just heard exactly why that is. And this is, and what's funny is that I can track my own, thought processes, because I tell people all the time, had I stayed, where I grew up, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. There's just no way that there was no room for the type of thought processes and action steps that are necessary. That I'm guessing that there was no room for that either in that, what do you say? It was a one stoplight town with 13 bars.
Exactly.
No room there for that either. Now, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting, and I think many entrepreneurs must also follow a very similar path as to what you were just laying out. You mentioned that during the show, that there was a point at which that the participant had to have a breakdown in order to have a breakthrough. For me personally, I feel that that's kind of necessary as you're out there to develop cash flow of any kind or any business or what have you. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on what you would say.
Well, I wish it were different, but in my experience of observation, and it was funny, I was just at an event. I still attend events and invest in my future and all this. I was just at an event with a good friend of mine, Marshall Thurber, who many of you guys may have heard of. Marshall, he's one of the two rich dads that Robert Kiyosaki had. It was Marshall Thurber and Keith Cunningham. Well, Marshall is just brilliant. The guy reads 3 books a day. He designs exercises. He put us through one this weekend, which the whole purpose of it is to cause perturbance. And he talks about perturbance being getting your mind to the point where the left brain and the right brain split. And what that means is that your logical mind can no longer handle the reality, so your emotional mind has to take over, and that's when you have the breakthrough. So in my experience, unfortunately, most people have to have some kind of a breakdown before they have a breakthrough, until they have rewired their subconscious or their neuropathy to the point where they are constantly improving and evolving. And that does happen once people have a foundation in place. Unfortunately, most people's foundation is made of quicksand instead of solid.
Oh, goodness gracious, he did not just say that. And that's it's like one of the things that's been coming up for me recently is that a lot of people come to us and they say, hey Jay, how do I get started? How can I make things happen? And they always ask the question, they ask me anyway, do you think I can do this? And for most people, I have to respond very honestly and say, no, I don't think you can do this. You must be someone different. What your life is currently built on, how you currently think, how you currently do everything must have a severe modification first before you have a shot at going in the correct direction. Now, the good news is that all that stuff is learned, and you can, unlearn it and relearn new different things, including how to deal with wealth. Now, my question to you is, you have this thing called the 4 levels of wealth. Talk to us a little bit about that, so that, we can maybe use this as a way to measure, our own progress and where we are, and how to make sure that we can obtain the levels of wealth that we're looking to see.
Sure. And this is really simple. So if somebody wants to write this down, you'll get this in a heartbeat. And this is an assessment that actually an observation. What happened was we started looking at thousands of our clients, and they were, investing in our programs to help them improve their financial performance, improve their health, and improve their happiness. That's what we call your trilogy score: your happiness, health, and wealth, the three areas of life that most people want to improve. So when I started looking at this, I had our clients turn in their financials. And we noticed some really interesting things. Number one, they fell into these four categories. And the first category, level one of wealth, is called repair and recovery. Now, repair and recovery is anybody who is dealing with credit card debt or, liens against them, or just financial stress in some way, shape, or form. They're operating in a negative net worth or negative cash flow every month, whether it's in their personal life or their businesses. So a lot of our country in the United States, for example, is in repair and recovery. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that that's where you're starting. So we need to design a strategy that's appropriate for somebody who's in repair and recovery. They might also have impacted their credit score, for example. So the next level, level two, is called foundation. And foundation, like we were just suggesting, is not the cool, fun, and sexy part of building wealth. It's actual work. And as one of my best friends says, he says, the problem with opportunity for most people is opportunity shows up in the form of work clothes. So, you got to look at this and say, okay, so this is where I develop my habits of wealth. This is where I start to understand the rules of wealth. This is where I have to start to create value. I have to know the numbers. I have to consistently create more income than outgo. These are the basics. It's nothing rocket science about it. But what we found also is that people who are in repair and recovery have a tendency to play what I call the ostrich approach to wealth. They've got their head buried in the sand, and that leaves their you-know-what up in the air, which is a pretty vulnerable place for people to be. So we try to yank their head out of the sand and show them the numbers and show them, hey, it's okay. And when you first pull your head out of the sand, it's kind of bright. It kind of hurts your eyes. You're kind of, bewildered a little bit. But eventually you get your footing underneath you. And that's what we do, is help people understand that let's get your head out of the sand and let's start to create a direction. Let's build a foundation that's solid so that we can get you to level three. And level three is reserves. Now, when you're in reserves, you've got, for example, 2x or more income over expenses. Whether it's active or passive income, it's not relevant to us, but you're operating at 2x or more. We try to get our clients up to 3, 4, 5, or even 20x their expenses. So if I get you, let's say your expenses are $5,000 a month, if we can get you to $10,000 a month, you're at 2x. If we can get you to $20,000 a month, well, then you're at 4x. And what happens is we start getting people in reserves. So we help them stuff away their cash first, so that they build a 6-month to 12-month cash reserves. And then we get them into position to begin to start investing, whether it's in passive income streams or building a business or whatever. And there's multiple areas to do that. So that's in the reserves. And, we've got clients right now that have, close to a couple $1 million in net worth. They're in the reserves. We've got clients who are generating $100,000 a month, and they're in reserves. Now, on the flip side, we've got clients who are generating $100,000 a month, but their expenses are up in the 90,000s too. So to us, they're not actually in reserves. They're in high cash flow, but they have not been able to manage their expenses to actually get them ahead in the game. So the fourth level being mastery. And mastery is not just where your actual financials are. Mastery is as much as of a mindset as it is anything else. You have mastered the mental and emotional side of wealth, and you've moved from being an expert into a visionary. And a visionary is somebody who is not only taking care of their finances, but somebody like you or myself who's out there, or John or whoever, who is helping others do the same thing, because we can see down the road that if we can help more people succeed, then our environments become more successful in turn.
You just reminded me of something right there that I didn't tell you, that you don't know, is that when we first met, I was in this space. It was the same time I met John for the first time. And I was in this space where I was feeling stuck personally, because I was like, what else can I do? I didn't really want to. I knew that I could go out there and buy another 20, 30, 40, 50 units or whatever and add to my own portfolio. But it wasn't that didn't do it for me. That wasn't something that actually got me overly excited. And then you introduced me to John and his programs, etc. And the facilitating that introduction, sitting there, I think it was you called it I remember the initials were UWW. That's what I remember. Ultimate Wealth Workshop, if I'm not mistaken.
You got it.
And we in that space, even though I was there to help with the cash flow game, I was like, cool, this is something I could do. I could help a whole bunch of other people. That would be fun. And we've been on that path, ever since, but it was in part due to you and your influence and just showing that this is, that was like my next step at that time. And I needed, a physical example of what that looked like. And, a lot of what we do today is based upon that. And I definitely appreciate it.
Well, Jay, I'm glad I could be in an environment that helped you see more clearly, because that's all it did. You already had the talents, and I think you were already asking the questions. I just happened to introduce you to an environment that said, "Oh, crud, I could do that." So.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we've had lots of fun since then, obviously. But it's been something that now that's what gets me going, is knowing that. I've got one of my clients who just paid off one of their first rental properties. It's like, cool. Not only did they actually go through the process of getting the rental property, but now that rental property is paid off. And I'm just like, yes, now do that again.
There you go. And then once they master it, they can turn around and help others do the same thing.
And it's literally what I spend more time talking to that about with my kids than anything that we're doing, and it's just a lot. It's been a lot of fun. And I just, again, like I said, I just thank you for that. And I had forgotten about it until just now. You did create that. You gave me a way to look at it so that I could go out there and contribute in various different ways.
Fantastic.
Now, then what of the 4 levels, which would you say from your experience becomes the most challenging and or difficult for people to accept? I mean, because for me, and I'll just talk about myself personally, I know part of my challenge has been, etc., the fact that how I grew up affected a lot about, who money was for, who wealth was for, how wealth was obtained, who the type of persons were, and it affects you through those stages. Because that's, and I'm just curious, because you mentioned about the mental mastery side of wealth, and I'm just kind of curious, what in your experience, what do you think most people have a challenge with? Yes, I'm going to let you know what most people have a challenge with, but before we do, wanted to interrupt you and let you know something very important. You want to go over to the website, CashFlowDiary.com, where you find this particular episode, okay? Because later you're going to find out, and as we continue to talk, this is going to be the first of three, many, many incredible guests that are coming. And we're all going to be on stage together in San Diego, coming up in the middle of June. So you want to be there down in San Diego, June 19th, 20th, 21st. And meet us all. It's at the Money Squared event with John Assaraf, Sharon Lecter, and Jim Bunch, of course, and as well as a number of others who we will introduce you to as this week goes forward. Definitely catch us there. Anyway, I want to get you guys back to this particular interview. Also know that, yes, I've made progress on the audiobook. It will be coming soon, so feel free to put yourself on the list, 949-682 3565, 949-682-3565. What you're going to do is you're going to actually send a text message to that number. With the keyword is audio, AUDIO. That'll let you know when the audiobook is coming out and all those types of things. You'll be one of the first people to know about it so that you can be there in line to grab your copy and hear me read the book to you, Cash Flow Diary, 10 Steps to Creating Wealth in Any Economy. And thank you again for listening, guys. I know right now you're wanting to get right back to that interview, and here we go.
Well, again, I think it's at each level there's something different. So if somebody's in repair and recovery, but they they're still in the denial phase, they're still in the ostrich phase. The simple reality is for them to take a look at where they're at in their wealth. And rule number one that we teach is know the numbers. If you don't know the numbers, if you're guessing or you're make believing of what the numbers are, you don't have the actual data, then guess what? You are going to stay in repair and recovery. So the metaphor that I often share with people is I said, listen, if the land of riches and wealth was in San Diego, but you currently live in New York, okay, we can develop a strategy for you to get here. You might have to walk. You might have to ride a bike. You might ride a skateboard. You might fly. You might ride a horse. You might whatever. There are strategies, and then there's pathways to get there. Okay, so what's the pathway? Well, I'm going to take this interstate and that freeway and this, all this. Well, here's the challenge. If I tell you the land of riches and wealth are in San Diego, and you think you're in New York, but in reality, you're in North Carolina. But we set out with the strategy and the path, but from the wrong starting point, then it doesn't work. And this is where most people get into trouble, is they either don't know where they're starting from because they're guessing, or the emotional side of it is so bad they just don't want to take a look at it, or they're embarrassed, they're afraid, they're confused, they're frustrated. They don't really know their numbers. Number two is they're not clear on where they're going. And sometimes where they're going, they can't see mastery. They only need to focus on foundation. So the moment that somebody makes a decision, I'm ready to handle this. I'm ready to take responsibility. I'm no longer going to blame, shame, or justify where I'm at. I'm simply going to take responsibility for where I am, how I got here, and where I want to go. That immediately moves them from repair and recovery into foundation. And that is a mental and emotional shift. You've done this before. I've done this before, where things